Kombit has been theorized in general as something, a type of practice that comes out of the continent, right? That many different African peoples were engaged in this sort of mutual exchange of labor, right? So that if I work on your land and help you plant and harvest, that I will benefit from your harvest, but also that I have promised my labor in the future to you as well, right? And a lot of folks talk about how these practices are already coming from the continent, right? They are being preserved, if you will, even in the bottom of the ships, because as we know, African people didn't come emptied out of all of their practices. In fact, they carried them, and these are the types of beliefs and practices that allowed them to survive, right? The plantation, and also that animated them to resist, and to resist violently, right? And to resist with force as well. So, and the Kombit continued to be very much an operating, a type of practice that existed on the plantation, right? So if your owner, quote unquote, right, is not really interested in feeding you, right? They just want to work you to death, then you are responsible for your own survival. So Kombit actually also became very much, right, an American practice, that this is a way for people to survive, right, against the plan of, right, their demise. And so this continues to the Kombit practices, whether, you know, through the plantation system, right, it continues to anchor Haiti post the revolution, where really Haitians were not subjected to the forces of the market in the same way that we're going to see it happening in the 20th century, and especially post-1970s. And this is what I'll talk about next in terms of understanding what produced this disaster. But Kombit, just through all the different iterations of colonialism and capitalism, continued to be the way that folks, the majority of the people still living in the rural areas, were organizing life, right, together. And even when you have an accelerated urbanization of Haiti starting in the 70s in particular, people are not leaving these beliefs and practices behind. In fact, they need them even more than before, because they're coming into a city that's very much abandoned, right? That where the state, as the colonial state that it is, isn't really concerned about building houses or providing infrastructure or education or healthcare. So people have to continue to organize their own lives, right? So these principles that they had in the rural areas, even though now they were living in a different setting, continued to shape their lives, right? And so they have this rich tradition that's hundreds and even thousands of years old, depending on how far you want to trace the practice, that's coming to bear in this moment, right? That they're already able to pull from, because it's part of already a practice that's taking place in these communities, right? So you see really that Kombit, and maybe Maryland wouldn't call it Kombit, and she might call it something else, because there are, you know, different ways depending on where you are regionally that people talk about the Kombit around different terms, but essentially the idea remains the same, right? So people were able to pull from these existing ways of doing and being in this moment of great disaster.